Hi, thank you for watching our presentation. It's called Awareness in Public Speaking. The participants in this group were Allison Sands, Amanda Moore, Marcela Sandoval, and Paul Quintana. Our presentation is going to go over the following topics in the order of first the literature review, then the purpose of study, followed by methods, results, limitations, conclusion, and the references.
Hi everybody, my name is Paul and I'm going to go over the articles that were used in our study. Glassman study saw that it was common for people to engage in nervous habits and anxiety while public speaking. Some of these common nervous habits were reduced eye contact, long and frequent pauses, and speech fillers such as uhs, likes, a lot of things that we all like to use a lot. These nervous habits were really important to reduce because it can affect our occupational, educational, and social functioning in our everyday life, especially if we're in a role where we have to talk to people and give public speeches out. And in this study, we found out that it was very effective to use behavior strategies and behavior therapies to reduce these habits. Our next study that we used was Freeman's in 2014, and this article goes over 15 behavioral based steps to reduce nervous habits and how to be better prepared for public speaking. I think if you have a chance, you should check out this article. It has very well thought out steps and a paragraph or two for each step that you can really go into detail. And I think it's a really great article to improve your speeches. I'm gonna go over some of the steps that I thought were really important and that I think really helped me out and I'm trying to use now and use every day. The first one, is to prepare. You have to, write your notes. You want to practice in front of the mirror. You want to practice in front of the camera. Something that we should all do before we do something because you don't want to just go without any practice, with just going cold turkey. It's very hard. So that's one thing that you should do. And another and about preparing, it's very important to prepare for the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes of your speeches. The first 5 minutes is when you are the most nervous, so you want to make sure you're prepared and you don't want to have that nervous creep up on you when you start your speech. And the last 5 minutes, because it's when you're closing out your speech and you're giving out the important tips or topics, whatever you're saying at the end. You want to make sure you do that clearly and you're not nervous at that time. So you want to make sure you practice for those first and 5 minutes. I think another great tip that I read in this article was to study people that are really good at public speaking. You check out YouTube videos, check out things in the news, whatever that you can find. And people public speaking, you can study them, see what they do, see, because we all can get nervous, and there are ways that we can kind of hide that. So I think it's good to check that out. So if that is something that I tried to do, I looked at some YouTube videos and just looked at people what they were doing, what they were public speaking. Another tip that I thought was good and I think pretty simple is to stand up straight, smile and be and look comfortable in front of people when you're giving your public speech. So I think it's a very simple tip, but it's definitely very important. The last tip that I found in this article that I thought was great was to tell a story in your speech using using a personal story is a good way to for you to feel comfortable and be able to tell something that in the back of your head and that you experienced. It's not something that's made up or that you wrote. It's something that you've gone through. So it's much easier to write about, and it can really make you feel comfortable for the rest of the speech. So, like I said, if you want to check out some of those tips, you should really check them out because there are really great 15 tips there, and they're all behavioral based steps. So check them out as soon as you can, guys. They're really good. Then the last article that I'm going to speak before I go to the next slide is Safer's, and in this article, it looked for ways to decrease public speaking anxiety and nervous habits using virtual reality cognitive behavior therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy has been found to be very effective at reducing nervous habits. And this was the next step to continue that intervention, a virtual reality one, where therapists and the people in charge were really able to it gave them more opportunities and more chances to be able to meet with the client or the participant and and be able to interact with each other way more than setting up a session, meeting up the next day because you have more instant access with them. So this was a really great way to reduce some of those nervous habits. And in this study, virtual cognitive behavior therapy reduced anxiety and nervous habits in out of five participants. And this intervention has proven to be very effective at reducing these habits. But in our study, we wanted to look at a different intervention, and we wanted to focus on awareness training to reduce those habits, and that's what I will be talking about. The next two articles that we are going to look at use awareness training to reduce habits. The first one, Wisco and Klatt, use habit reversal training to reduce habit disorders. A very important component of habit reversal training was awareness training, which required the participant to describe the behavior, which in this study were tics. After the participant was able to describe the behavior, they will move on to identifying when the behavior would occur or if it's about to occur. The studies show that awareness training alone could reduce habits such as tics, which this study focused on, a type of nervous habit. And using using this study, we saw that it can be very effective using habit reversal with awareness training to reduce habits such as tics or other nervous habits. In the next article that I looked at, Mancuso and Miltenberger used awareness training to decrease nervous habits like filled pauses and public speaking. Some of these filled pauses consisted of or clicking sounds, like if you click your tongue, and the inappropriate use of like. In this study, the participants used awareness training, which included response description and response detection. In response description, the researcher and participant examined the topography of the target behavior. In response detection, the participant watched a 3-minute video clip of their speech that they gave and practiced detecting the nervous habits. After using awareness training, the results revealed that awareness training significantly reduced all of the nervous habits during the public speaking. After reviewing the previous research, we wanted to see the effectiveness of awareness training. Thus, the purpose of this study was to evaluate the relationship between awareness training and its effectiveness on reducing the amount of nervous habits used when public speaking.
The participants in the study were 4 graduate students attending Ball State University. Allison was a second-year graduate student who expressed interest in improving her communication skills to better communicate with colleagues and clients in her profession. She reported frequently using verbal fillers and speaking very quickly. Her target behaviors for reduction included filled pauses, specifically using the word inappropriate use of the word like, and occasional tongue clicking. My name is Amanda, and I'm a second-year graduate student who expressed interest in improving my public speaking skills to better communicate with others in small group settings and at my job. I reported frequent use of verbal fillers when speaking in small groups and inappropriate use of the word like. My target behaviors for reduction included filled pauses, so using and likes. Poole was a first-year graduate student who expressed interest in improving his public speaking skills for speeches and leadership roles. He reported frequent use of and talking too slow or fast during his speeches. His target behaviors for reduction included filler words, including and likes. Marcella was a second-year graduate student who expressed interest in improving her public speaking skills to better improve her communication skills where she worked. She reported frequently using the word when engaging with coworkers, as well as inappropriately using the word like during conversations. Her target behaviors included the use of filled pauses, such as and the frequent use of the word like. All parts of the study, which included the baseline awareness training, post-awareness training, booster sessions, and generality probes, were all taken by using Google Hangouts on air with YouTube Live at each participant's home. The target behaviors of concern in this study occurred during public speaking scenarios and were 3 nervous habits that included filled pauses, tongue clicks, and inappropriate use of the word like. Filled pauses were operationally defined as any time the participant emitted the speech sound or word or that had no semantic meaning in a sentence. Occurrences of filled pauses were tallied at the end of each occurrence. Tongue clicks were defined as the speaker creating a click sound with his or her tongue that could be heard when in the same room, and it sounded something like this. Likes were operationally defined as any occurrence of the word like in a sentence that did not follow correct grammatical form. Examples were, I went to like the store, or another example would be, I really would, like to go to the store. This definition did not include the speaker saying like when talking about something that interested him or her. I like to go to the movies, or I really like to eat pizza, or when expressing similarity between 2 or more items. An example would be, I am very much like her father. In this study, each participant was a principal investigator, a PI for another participant. Pairing off participants for baseline awareness training and post-awareness training and booster sessions is how we completed this study. Allison took data on Marcella. Marcella took data on Pool. Pool took data on me, and I took data on Allison. Frequency within 15-second interval recording was used to collect data on each of the target behaviors the participant engaged in during his or her speech. Although frequency data was recorded separately for each type of the 3 target behaviors, we combined habits per minute in the end.
IOA data was taken on 33 to 36% of sessions across the 4 participants. Each participant collected IOA data on a participant that they did not serve as being a PI for. So this means that if you took data on somebody or they took data on you during this speeches, during each of the awareness training baseline, then you did not take IOA data on that person. You took data on a different participant in a different group. For our IO data, we took mean count, inter-observer agreement, so that meant that we took the smaller number and it divided by the greater number of observations per each interval and got the average and scored times that by 100 to get a percentage for each interval. Then we added up all of the percentages for each interval and divided that by the number of intervals in that session to get the average, and then times that so we would get a percentage for each session, and that's how we collected our IOA data for each session. On this slide, you can see the actual percentages of the IOA data that we collected. For each participant, you can see that for Allison, the mean IOA was 95.1%. For Amanda, it was 76.01%. Marcella, 97.3%. And for Paul, the mean IOA data was 95.5%.
In all phases of this study, data on treatment fidelity was calculated for at least 33% of sessions. Each participant watched Hangouts on air with YouTube live recorded video sessions from each phase of the study and scored implementation steps. The number of steps scored as yes was divided by the total number of implementation steps for each list, and doing so provided a percentage of treatment fidelity. Items that were scored as not applicable were not included in the total number of implementation steps. Treatment fidelity was 100% across all phases and all participants in this study. To ensure social validity, each participant completed a questionnaire that was developed by one of the participants. The questionnaires assessed the acceptability and efficiency of the intervention, how satisfied each participant was with his or her own confidence when delivering public speeches by using a 1 through 5 Likert type rating scale that consisted of only whole numbers. Each participant completed this questionnaire during baseline and after completion of his or her final assessment. No additional social validity was completed in this study. A multiple baseline design across participants was used in this study, with each participant experiencing a baseline phase and a post-awareness training phase. Here is our multiple baseline design across participants graph showing our baseline data and our post-awareness training assessment data and our generality probe data. During baseline, the participants were asked to select between two simple topics to conduct their speech on, including but not limited to topics such as my favorite vacation, my first job, my first pet, our favorite hobby. Research was not necessary for speech preparation, and the topics provided for selection were based on each participant's own experiences or opinions. Each participant served as a principal investigator, the PI, for one other participant, and the PI utilized a timer, and each participant was provided a maximum of 10 minutes to prepare for his or her speech by way of taking notes on a small note card or creating an outline if he or she wanted to, as instructed by the PI. The note cards contained brief speaking points or bullet points and were allowed to be used during the speech by participants. Once the 10-minute timer went off, or if the participant felt that they were ready to deliver the speech prior to the 10 minutes that they were allowed, the participant was instructed by the PI to deliver his or her 3 to 5 minute speech by using Hangouts on Air with YouTube Live, during which the PI was the only person included on the video call. No other participants were included on the Hangouts on Air with YouTube Live call during this time. The PI then initiated recording of the video call and provided the participant with the vocal countdown. So the PI would say 3, 2, 1, start, and the participant would begin their speech. Upon saying start, the PI would also press the start for a 5-minute timer, and throughout the speech, the PI would use a white sheet of paper and a red sheet of paper to indicate how much time had elapsed during the speech. The white blank sheet was raised by the PI to indicate 1 minute of time remaining for the speech, and the red blank sheet was raised to indicate that 5 minutes had gone by and the timer went off. Video recording was stopped once the speech was completed. The participant was prompted by the PI to continue speaking if he or she had stopped during the speech for more than 15 seconds, or if the participant attempted to conclude his or her speech before 3 minutes had elapsed. The PI did not exhibit any facial expressions or display physical gestures to the participant during the speech, and no feedback was given to the participant regarding the speech or target behaviors after the speech was concluded. After baseline, we then did awareness training, which is called AT. During awareness training, each principal investigator implemented the response description and response detection components of awareness training for the participant they were responsible for in the context of a speech delivered by the participant. The response detection included a discussion about the specific behaviors that were targeted for reduction that each participant had exhibited during their baseline phase and their operational definitions, as well as the topographies for those behaviors. Each participant was shown the video that was recorded of themselves during the baseline sessions by the PI that was assigned to them, and each occurrence of the target behavior that they engaged in was identified. This was called response detection. Each participant then chose a different speech topic than the one they had chosen during baseline and was once again allowed 10 minutes to prepare for a speech. While the speech was delivered, the participant then raised his or her right hand for each occurrence of the target behaviors of reduction. So if the target behaviors for reduction were the use of fillers, and likes, every time they engaged in that behavior, they would raise their hand. The PI raised his or her hand for each occurrence of the target behaviors of reduction as well, but this was only during the beginning of the speech, and after the target behavior occurred 5 times, the PI then only raised their right hand to prompt the participant if he or she did not raise their hand on their own after 2 seconds of the target behavior occurring. The participant continued to deliver a speech on the same topic until 100% of occurrences of the target behaviors were identified during one presentation or if 90% of occurrences of the target behaviors were identified across 2 consecutive presentations. If they did not meet this criterion, the participant showed little to no improvement in identifying his or her own target behaviors after delivering 3 consecutive speeches, the awareness training was terminated. Once again, this was all done by using Hangouts on Air with YouTube Live. And during awareness training, Allison gave 3 speeches, I gave 3 speeches, Poole gave 4 speeches, and Marcella gave 2 speeches. The mean number of speeches that were delivered was 3, and the mean duration of awareness training sessions, so this included response description, response detection, speech preparation, and speech delivery, was 18 minutes. We then went into post-AT assessment. The sequence of procedures that were implemented for the post-AT assessments was the same as the baseline procedures. And then we had booster sessions. So if during the first post-AT assessment, a participant's nervous habits did not decrease by 80% compared to the average of his or her baseline level, or if the data demonstrated a trend that was increasing and not decreasing, a booster AT session was completed. The procedure that was done for the booster AT session was the same as the procedure that was done in awareness training. After the booster session, a post-AT assessment was completed at least a day later by the participant. Booster sessions continued to be implemented until the data was stable during post-AT assessments. Allison ended up giving 2 speeches during her booster session. I gave 4 speeches during mine. Poole had 1 booster session, and Marcella did not have any booster sessions. To check for generalization, we then did generality probes, and 1 generality probe was completed for each participant, and it was done following each participant's final post-intervention assessment. So they were given a choice between 2 novel speech topics that were chosen from the same list that they had not given a previous speech on. This was for the generality probe. Although the speech procedures were the same as the baseline procedures, since this was a generality probe, each participant now delivered his or her speech in front of all participants in the study, again using Hangouts on Air with YouTube Live. The participants that were not delivering the speech did not provide feedback to the participant delivering the speech during and after the speech. And here you can see on our graph that you do see a decrease in our nervous habits during our post-AT assessments and during the generality probe across participants.
What we found in our results portion of our study was that not all participants needed to engage in a booster session in order to help decrease their use of habit behaviors. When looking at the 3 behaviors, we found that verbal fillers such as and continued being the behavior that we engaged in the most from baseline to our post-assessment. We found that the second most used behavior was the use of the word like. Tongue clicks only occurred across 1 session with 1 participant, but remained the lowest behavior that we engaged in. When we were looking at the duration of each speech across participants, it averaged out to about 3 minutes across all participants throughout the entire intervention. Table 3 provides information on each participant averages across intervention. It looks at the baseline average, the post-assessment average, and the generality probe average. As you can see by looking at, say, participant Amanda's data, at the beginning of the intervention, her baseline averaged out to 5.2 habits per minute. When they moved on to the post-assessment, her scores averaged out to 1.28 habits per minute. And when they moved on to the generality probe, which was conducted with an audience, her data averaged out to 0.33 habits per minute. During our study, we found that this was consistent across 3 out of 4 of the participants. One of the participants, as you can see, did decrease in the use of habit behaviors from their baseline to their post-assessment, but when it came to the generality probe, although she did decrease from the baseline, the generality probe jumped up a bit in the data. To assist with social validity, each participant was asked to fill out a questionnaire at the beginning of the study and at the end, which consisted of 4 questions rated on a 1 to 5 Likert scale, 1 being not efficient, 5 being very efficient. The questionnaire consisted of 4 questions. The first one had to do with the participants' belief in the acceptability and efficiency of the intervention. The second question had to do with the satisfaction the participant had with their treatment outcome. The third question asked about the participants' personal opinion of their perception of public speaking skills. And the fourth question had to do with the participants' consideration of their own confidence when speaking in public. As you can see in baseline, all 4 scores average closer to 1 to 3 points on the Likert scale, which shows that they didn't feel that their answers to these were very efficient. As you can tell, once they moved into the post-AT and went through the intervention, their scores increased. And you can see that they found that acceptability and efficiency was more efficient. Their satisfaction with their treatment outcome was more efficient, as well as their perception of their own public skills and confidence. You can see that there was a change in scores of about 1.75 when it came to acceptability and efficiency. There was a change of 1.5 with satisfaction with treatment outcome. There was a change of 1.25 with perception of public speaking. And there was a change of 1 point when it came to confidence, which was interesting, as you would feel that their confidence would increase along with their perception of public speaking. But 3 out of the 4 participants did relay that they still were not as confident with their public speaking skills even after going through the awareness training. We found through our results that when awareness training was implemented, there was an improvement in the decrease of use of habit behaviors such as the word or the inappropriate use of the word like or tongue clicking. When participants were asked how they felt when giving their speech, they did relay that they had some feelings of nervousness and anxiety. This also reflected in the questionnaire that was conducted at the beginning and at the end of intervention, which I previously discussed. Some possible factors that we found could contribute to the decrease in habit behaviors was that when awareness training was implemented, the participants became more self-aware. They would indicate this by making facial gestures or slight indications of that they made a mistake.
There were several limitations that we came across while we were doing our study. The biggest limitation that I found was due to the fact that the researchers were also the participants in the study. So we were aware of the results that we needed in order to move on to the next phrase. We were also aware of the speech habits that we make that we were keeping track on, so we could replace those with others. So in our study, as mentioned, we were tracking uhs and those filled pauses, likes and inappropriate manners like saying just like that one. We also were tracking tongue clicks, which is the noise like which you can find somewhere. So we were aware of the speech habits that we were keeping track of, and I noticed that when we were tracking those, we replaced them with different speech habits. So instead of saying or we would go and or so, or we would talk really, really slow so that we wouldn't get those speech habits and track the data on it and have lower results. I also noticed this mostly happened when we were going from baseline to the next phase, where we would put the awareness training, and then we needed to get below 80% 2 sessions in a row, or we had to get 100% of being aware of our speech habits to move on to the next phase. So we were aware of that, and it kind of affected our speeches. Another limitation to our project was that speeches were done via Google Hangouts and YouTube Live, which had 2 limitations involved with that. One is that the distance of the participants we weren't able to meet, so our speeches were done in front of a computer screen, which isn't a true public speech because you're giving a speech in front of a computer screen. The other person could have had their screen go black, so you were really just looking at a computer screen and not really giving a speech in front of a group of people, which definitely has an impact on your presenting of a public speech. This also meant that we weren't able to generalize our data to see if it actually would generalize to a situation where we would give a public speech in front of. This also impacted due to technology complications. We weren't always able to hear everybody, or we would spend lots of time trying to get a good connection for everybody so that we all could hear each other while we were talking. During our generalization, we had this problem. So not everybody could hear the speeches while we were giving them, but our faces were down at the bottom, so it was everybody was there, but not everybody could hear, and we would have to have an interpreter afterwards to inform those participants and researchers in the group what was going on during that time. Another limitation to the study was the time allotted for the replication study. It was for a class, so the amount of time that we had was shortened. We only had a couple of months. We also had deadlines due, which impacted how long we had for each phase, especially the baseline. So for the baseline, unfortunately, there were a couple where the data isn't as stable as we would have liked to, but we had to move on to the next phase just because we were running out of time on there. The last one that we had was a mid-study misunderstandings. The study that we did, it talked about if in the awareness training, you needed to get 80% or higher of identifying your speech habits. So during, and if you didn't, or 100% in one awareness training session, then you wouldn't move on. One of our participants, they got their speech habits actually increased during the awareness training, and so we were a little unaware of what to do if they were to have failed the next session as well, because then they would have gotten 3 where no improvement was shown at all. Luckily for our participant, they actually got 100% of identifying their habits during their last awareness training session, and so they were able to proceed and move on. But this is a limitation because it said that they were terminated if they didn't improve during the awareness training, and we didn't know it, like that meant they were terminated from the entire study, if they were terminated just from awareness training, or what moved on. So that is definitely some clarification that needed to be improved and made, and for future studies or replications of the study, they would definitely need to consider and find a good solution for that problem, because it was definitely a limitation.
When looking into further research, we came across a number of considerations that could possibly be looked into in the future. One being what to do when there was little to no improvement in the awareness training. There was really no indication in the study we were replicating of what to do if this occurred. The second consideration we came across was what to do when no booster sessions were needed. In the study that we were replicating, it showed that all participants in that study needed a booster session in order to further decrease the use of habit behaviors. But in our study, 3 out of the 4 participants required a booster session and 1 did not. So it would be interesting to kind of see what a booster session could affect the data that was collected. The third consideration we came across was the setting. How could the setting affect the data? The study that we were replicating was conducted in more of a structured setting with the PI present in vivo Whereas when we conducted the study, due to everyone being in different locations, it had to be conducted via Hangouts air on YouTube Live. So that could have played a big difference in the data and the decrease in habits when engaged in a conversation or storytelling across an audience. The fourth consideration we came across was additional distractions. Since we were doing this through a different communication avenue than we would have if we were conducting the study in vivo, we found that there were additional distractions such as background noise, we had technical issues, and would have to stop and re-record that section again. So we would have to repeat the story, which could have led to a change in the scores that we received and the decrease in engagement and habit behavior, such as using using like or tongue clicks. And the last consideration that could be looked into in the future would be the timing of data collection. In our study, we tracked data as the participant was giving their speech throughout giving their speech. Whereas in the study we were replicating, they recorded the participant giving their speech to the PI, and later watching the video recorded data on the number of habit behaviors they engaged in. So it would be interesting to kind of see if this made a big difference in increasing possibly the nervousness or anxiety of the participant, which could have ultimately affected the scores that they received across intervention. There were differences that we found between the study we conducted and Spielberg and Miltenberg's 2017 study on implementation of awareness training to decrease nervous habit behaviors in public speaking, one being the avenue used to conduct the study. As we mentioned, due to being in different locations, we had to conduct the study via Hangouts on air with YouTube Live, whereas Spieler and Miltenberg had to conduct their study in person. Another difference that we found was that they tracked data after speeches were recorded. So they would record the participant giving their speech and then review the recording and track data then. Whereas we tracked data while the participant was delivering the speech. Overall, we found the results to be that no matter these differences, whether being the avenue used or the data tracking, there still showed a decrease in the speech habit behaviors regardless of the differences. We also found that more research is needed on awareness training in order to see its effectiveness, not just across one individual and moving on to a group or audience, but potentially looking into the effects of this being conducted in groups from the beginning of baseline to post-assessment to the generality probe. So we look forward to seeing what the future research brings as far as awareness training. So we hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we hope that you can possibly look into conducting the awareness training and seeing how that helps decrease your habit behaviors when engaged in public speaking. Thank you. Here are a few of the references that we use for this study. Here are the remainder of our references. Thank you.